Why was it wrong for the Israelites to eat blood? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on Walking Through the Bible.
Of his word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Leviticus chapter 17. We're going to be reading from verses 10 to 16. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus 17, beginning at verse 10. And whatever man of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who dwell among you, who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, no one among you shall eat blood, nor shall any stranger who dwells among you eat blood. Whatever man of the children of Israel, or of the strangers who dwell among you, who hunts and catches any animal or bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with dust. For it is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains its life. Therefore I said to the children of Israel, you shall not eat the blood of any flesh, for the life of all flesh is in its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off. And every person who eats what died naturally, or what was torn by beasts, whether he is a native of your own country or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean. But if he does not wash them or bathe his body, then he shall bear his guilt. In this chapter thus far, we had God correcting something that Israel had done in Egypt, which is worshiping other gods. We know at Mount Sinai that they had already done this with the golden calf, but this was a problem long before that. When they arrived in Egypt, they were not idolaters, but they lived for 400 years among a people who were. Generations were born, lived and died in Egypt without it appearing that the true God was acting. And as we know from experience, when it comes to serving God, the first generation who does so with vigor and zeal, and does so with the determination to do it properly. The second generation, though still having zeal, has it less than the first. The third generation has it less than the second, with the fourth generation and onwards being fortunate if they have any interest in serving God properly at all. Even when Israel gets to Canaan and conquers it, it would be when the generation that did not know Joshua came along that they turned to idolatry. Not a long time indeed. So it's no wonder here in Leviticus 17 that God needed to do some correcting. And what was this correction? Instead of slaughtering oxen, sheep, and goats for food just anywhere, where someone might be tempted to sacrifice them either improperly to God or to a false god, they were to bring these animals to the tabernacle and offer them as peace offerings to God, part of which they were allowed to eat since it was a peace offering. In a sense, this would kill two birds with one stone, in that it would be teaching Israel to properly sacrifice to God, and it would prevent them from sacrificing to false gods. The person who didn't follow this command was to be cut off from among the people. It should be noted, though, that this regulation, though not the command not to sacrifice to false gods, was repealed in Deuteronomy 12, just before Israel entered Canaan, when such a regulation would become infeasible to carry out. Although verse 10 might look like the conversation has changed, it really hasn't, for the stipulations about not eating blood is another correction that God needs to make. This is the third time in Leviticus that God has told the children of Israel not to eat blood. What does that mean? The children of Israel must have been in the habit of doing so, a habit that they must have picked up while in Egypt. What was the reason that God gave as to why they weren't to eat blood? Because the life is in the blood, and the blood was used in the sacrifices for the atonement of the soul. As we know, man cannot live without blood. Drain us of our blood, and we will die. The same would be true with all animals that have blood. Since the blood carried with it the symbol of life, that's why man was not to shed another man's blood, for they would be taking the life of another who is made in the image of God. But even in killing an animal who is not made in the image of God, the way the blood was handled was to be proper. If they killed an animal before eating it, the blood needed to be properly drained. The life-giving force, so to speak, was to be taken out of the animal so that it could be said that you were not eating the life of the animal, only its meat. However, and perhaps a more important reason that Israel was not to eat blood, was that blood was used to atone for the soul. The blood of all animal sacrifices was sprinkled around the altar of burnt offering. For certain sacrifices, the blood was sprinkled before the veil of the sanctuary. And on the Day of Atonement, the blood was sprinkled before the mercy seat of God, which was behind the veil in the sanctuary. Blood and atonement go hand in hand. The blood of one needed to be shed, the life needed to be given in order for atonement to be received. under the law of Moses, that was the blood of an animal, though it could not remit sin. But today it is the blood of Christ. Due to the relationship between blood and atonement, the children of Israel were not to eat blood, and they weren't even to allow strangers who dwelt among them to do so. And the Lord willing, when we get to our study of Acts, because of this same relationship between blood and atonement, we'll find that we, as Christians, are not to eat blood either. What would happen to the Israelite who did so? They would be cut off from among the people. What would happen if they ate an animal that had died naturally, in other words, the blood not properly drained? Well, presumably, this would be done by mistake because Exodus 22:31 said they weren't to do such, but if they did, they were unclean until evening and would need to purify themselves by washing their clothes and bathing in water. If they did not do this, they would bear their guilt and would be required to offer the sacrifices similar to the ones prescribed in chapter 5 in order to be forgiven of their sins. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus chapter 18, verses 1 to 18, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.